If you're having a good time listening to Bradbury 100, please check out my other podcast, Science Fiction 101. And don't forget to visit my website at bradburymedia.co.uk. This is Bradbury 100, celebrating the life and works of American writer Ray Bradbury. Hello once again, and welcome to Bradbury 100. It's a bit of a different episode today, as it's actually a crossover with my other podcast, Science Fiction 101. My co-host from that show, Colin Kuskie, recently saw the film It Came From Outer Space on the big screen, and he suggested that we review it together. So that's what we did. Colin is a long-time science fiction fan and is particularly interested in adaptations of books into films, which is the focus of his other podcast, Take Me to Your Reader. Colin is familiar with quite a lot of Bradbury books and their adaptations, and I, of course, am quite obsessive about Bradbury's work in film. So I bring to the discussion my usual angle of looking at the original script, Bradbury's original contribution to the film, and how It Came From Outer Space may or may not reflect his intent, or the intent of the official screenwriter of the film, Harry Essex, or the intent of the director, Jack Arnold. Now, if you're already a subscriber to my other podcast, Science Fiction 101, you will also get what follows in your feed for that podcast. But I won't be offended if you stop listening right here. Just do remember to come back for the next episode of Bradbury 100, if you would please. But if you're not a regular listener of Science Fiction 101, I'll just say here that it's a very eclectic show, and we've covered everything from Lee Brackett and Star Wars to the books of John Wyndham, from Doctor Who to the writers' Bibles for Star Trek. We review films and books and short stories, anything and everything to do with science fiction. And we usually try to wind each other up with a fiendish science fiction quiz. I'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes for this podcast, if that's not too confusing. Anyway, here we go then. Science Fiction 101 reviews Ray Bradbury's It Came From Outer Space.
Hi, I'm Colin.
And I'm Phil.
We're the hosts of Science Fiction 101.
It's a show which gets to the heart of science fiction. Books, films, TV. We've covered Star Trek,
Doctor Who,
Star Wars.
We love to explore the past, present, and future of science fiction.
And we'd love for you to join us
on Science Fiction 101.
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Phil.
Here we are once again, Science Fiction 101. Today, with a crossover episode, because I'm also going to release this as a Bradbury 100 episode. So, strange sort of hybrid crossover. And the reason is that we're going to discuss a Bradbury product. We're going to talk about It Came From Outer Space, the 1950s movie, written originally by Ray Bradbury. And it's a film that, Colin, I think you've seen recently.
Yeah, I saw it at the OMSI Science Fiction Film Festival.
So it was on a big screen.
The biggest in Oregon.
Was it in 3D?
It was not in 3D.
Ah, okay. So you've missed out on one dimension there. So I have a slight advantage in that I have seen it in 3D, but only once. And that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. But I have a vivid recollection of the 3D effect. So we can talk about that if you wish at some point.
Sure, yeah.
What was your experience of the film prior to that? Had you ever seen it before?
I had never seen it before. I think the title was familiar to me, so that's kind of the level of familiarity that I had with it.
And before we go into the detail of the film, overall impression?
Well, it's definitely a 1950s movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was shown in black and white, the original. And if you're going to watch it, I recommend that you watch it in black and white. The colorized version done very well, and it bleeds over into the wrong places at the wrong times. The main actor has eyeshadow in several cases that I don't think was in the original. It has, and this is something that my son pointed out. He said it's got so many like old movie tropes, and I reminded him that at the time the movie was released, this established the very tropes that he gets tired of watching in movies that are made for the next 70 years. Things like, theremin music, dramatic brass music with bass drum overtones, the girl scream.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, these are original to this era and would have been expected.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can talk about those novelties that the film possesses, even though they're no longer novelties.
Yeah, so I saw it last week, and then I rewatched it last night because there are some great quotes. As from my other podcast, Take Me to Your Reader, where we do adapted movies, I'm always curious what things from the original work, whether it's a short story, a novel, or a screen treatment or a screen story, survives into the final product. And so that's something I'm hoping to ask you about. I'm guessing that you have studied this extensively.
A few times, yes.
A few times.
Fortunately, the original Bradbury treatment was published some years ago, only in a limited edition book, which is very hard to get hold of now. But I bought it when it came out, and it's got Bradbury's complete treatment. Well, in fact, several versions, because as with most screenwriters, they go through draft after draft. So there are several versions of Bradbury's draft of this. And just to be clear, Bradbury did not write the script officially for this film. He was hired to write a story that could be turned into a script and then turned into a film. In fact, if you read what he wrote, almost everything is in the film. There are a few additions that were made by the official screenwriter, Harry Essex, but most of it is what Bradbury put down on paper in the first instance. So he could legitimately have claimed a co-writer credit for this, but he was at the beginning of his screenwriting career, so, he just settled for story by Ray Bradbury. But it really is very much a Bradbury creation, with one or two moments that have been put in by other people, but almost all of it comes from Bradbury. So when you're watching it, there may be parts of it where you think, that sounds like Bradbury wrote this, and chances are he did. Can I ask you to summarize the plot?
Okay. John Putnam is an astronomer, and I have to confess, I didn't catch exactly where he lives, but it is a beautiful desert area. It's probably in California. It was shot in California, so that makes sense. And he has a girlfriend, kind of, Ellen Fields, who is the local school teacher. And one night, when they're outside talking about, the potential future of their relationship, they see something crash into the desert. It's big. It's a big fireball that streaks across the sky. And John, being an astronomer, immediately wants to go see it. So they go, and down deep in this crater appears to be a spaceship, all made of hexagons. And as he's watching it, a door opens in the side, and something stares out. He gets scared. He runs up the side of the crater. This causes an avalanche. It completely buries all evidence of this spaceship. But still, many people saw it, and so there are going to be the camera crews show up, people from the local university show up. John is trying to explain what he has seen, but he is so different from everyone else in the town that nobody fully believes him. They think it's just a meteor hit. In the meantime, odd things start happening. People start behaving very, very differently. And if you've ever seen the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, very, very similar.
Yeah.
They look exactly the same as they always have been, but they have a very stoic, emotionless appearance. And it turns out the aliens have adopted the appearance of these people. This is something they can do. And the aliens don't seem to have any nefarious purpose. They just want to fix their broken spaceship so they can leave. However, in order for them to impersonate people, they've kidnapped the originals. This gets out to the people in the town. The people in the town riot. John does the best that he can to stop them from rioting because one of the people they have kidnapped are his girlfriend, Ellen, the school teacher. And the aliens are eventually able to repair their ship, and they take off.
Hooray! So it's sort of a happy ending. I seem to remember there's a bit of an explosion at some point. And I don't know if it's totally clear whether every one of the humans who were captured manages to make it out alive.
No, they're running out of a mine. So it turns out that there's a mine shaft that intersects where the spaceship has landed in this crater, and that's how the aliens are coming in and out. John eventually goes into the mine shaft to tell the aliens that the town is going to riot, and tells them, you have to give them to me now because it'll buy you time to finish your final fixes. And so they're all leaving as they finish that. I think they all got out, but yeah, it's not 100% sure.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you describe Putnam as an astronomer, because in the film I think he is, although he's also a writer, because I think they talk about a book or an article that he's written.
Mm-hmm.
But in Bradbury's original treatment, I don't know whether Bradbury couldn't settle on what this man was, or whether he wanted to show him as being a kind of a Renaissance man.
Oh, yes.
Because according to my notes, in Bradbury's treatment, he's described as an all-round naturalist, a biologist, an archaeologist, a painter, and a part-time astronomer. So he seems to be like a super genius, but all he needs to be really is a kind of an everyman, although it is useful for him to be somewhat skeptical and questioning of things. He's seen things with his own eyes, but he also tends not to believe some of the things other people have said because they're a bit paranoid. And this is really one of the 1950s giveaways of this movie, is that it's got this thread of paranoia running through it, simply because people have been replaced by lookalikes, which is, as you say, it's the same idea as Invasion of the Body Snatchers and many, many other films. Yeah, so the theme of aliens taking over humans or replacing humans, as far as I can make out, it seems to have originated with Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, which was published in 1951. And then it's been reused endlessly since then. So 51 for The Puppet Masters, 53 for this film, I think. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, not sure. I think that's 55 or thereabouts. So it was clearly flavour of the month, wasn't it, to have this paranoia, which really is an expression of the real-life anti-communist paranoia of the 1950s. I grew up knowing that people were paranoid about communist takeovers in the 50s. I wasn't around in the 50s, but I knew that that's what people were paranoid about. And I grew up thinking that it was complete paranoia without any basis in reality. Now, I think it was paranoia, and it was over-exaggerated by those who were paranoid. However, it did have some basis in reality. In 1948, Czechoslovakia was taken over by the Communist Party. So we're just 3 years after World War II. We've got a communist takeover in a European country. In 1949, the Soviet Union exploded its first atomic bomb, which the Americans and the British thought was not possible because they didn't think the Russians had the bomb. In 1950, you had the start of the Korean War, which was communist China being involved in that war, fighting mainly against the Americans and other countries who sort of joined in to defend South Korea. Also in 1950, Klaus Fuchs, who was a scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project, he was proven to have been a spy all along. So he gave atom secrets to the Russians. And then in 1951, two Americans, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were found guilty of spying and, again, passing secrets to the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of communist activity in the UK and, in particular, in America. And so those who were paranoid about communists in the 50s, there was some basis to what they believed. And that paranoia is then what fuels all of these 1950s movies. And I don't think science fiction's ever really recovered from that. I think a lot of science fiction film is still about paranoia.
Yeah, I mean, even recent ones, I'm thinking Denis Villeneuve movies like Arrival, Dune Part 1 and Part 2. And that's not a fair comparison because he's adapting something that was written quite a bit earlier.
Right.
Yeah, but it seems to be a thing that works very, very well. You take an isolated group of people that are different from you and maybe doing things that are right or wrong. It doesn't always matter. And you say that your problems are caused by them.
Yes.
And that's one way to get a crowd behind you.
Absolutely. And a crowd with pitchforks, almost, because that's what sort of happens towards the end of the movie. That's where the pressure of time comes in this particular movie, to help these aliens, to get them out of here, because the sheriff and his deputies and a whole load of other townspeople are on their way. Not with literal pitchforks, but with guns, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's something that, how do I describe this? So John has several run-ins with the aliens, and at one point he asks them, what is going on? Why can't we see you? And the aliens tell him, your culture is not ready to accept us yet. If you saw us as we really are, you'd be horrified. So it's like you went to a bad part of town or something.
Yes.
And we just want to get home, and we know that there might be people that, because we look different or are different, won't trust us or allow us to do that.
And this is one of the things that does come specifically from Bradbury, because he had this idea that with something like a spider, we can be totally irrationally afraid of a spider. Most spiders can't hurt you. Well, I don't know about where you live, but where I live, I don't think there are any venomous spiders. I know in Australia there are, but in the UK, I don't think there are any. So a spider can't hurt you. And yet, many of us, myself included, if a spider appeared on my table right now, I'd be scared. I'm terrified of the things. I can just about cope with the tiny ones, but, anything bigger than your thumbnail just terrifies me. And it's totally irrational. And Bradbury was aware of that. And that's what he has his aliens be. Their natural form is such a thing that it would literally scare the bejesus out of us. And so, in Bradbury's treatment, we don't really see the aliens. He withholds them from us. He shows us their view of the world, but we don't really see them. There's a couple of glimpses of alien hands which are described as being reptilian. But other than that, nobody really sees the aliens. There comes a reveal in Bradbury's script where Putnam finally is allowed to see the aliens. But Bradbury still doesn't show us them. All he shows is Putnam reacting. And how he reacts is with a gigantic scream that sort of fills and echoes through the canyon or the valley, because it's supposed to be the most terrifying thing he's ever seen. But Bradbury figured that you can't show the most terrifying thing because it just wouldn't look terrifying. Whatever you try to show is not going to be terrifying. So what do the filmmakers decide to do? They decide to show it. So we do get a glimpse, and then more than a glimpse, of the alien several times through the film. And for years, I could never quite figure out what it was supposed to actually be, because I'd only ever seen it on TV and on VHS, and it was always a bit fuzzy. And I knew there was like an eye in the middle there, but the actual outline and contours of this alien, I could never quite figure out. And it's only when I saw it on a big screen in a cinema, and then finally when I saw it in 4K on a decent TV, that I got a good clear view of the alien in the film. And they're the most peculiar looking things. I mean, did you get a sense of what their physical form is?
Well, I mean, they were large and blobby, and they have like one eye in the middle of their body, and they have apparently, these kind of diaphanous tentacles or arms that they wrap around. Who do they show that happening to? Frank and George, the telephone and the electrician lineman repairman.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but really, we're told they look horrible by the actions of people. So when you get the point of view from the alien, and they're getting close to a person, and you see the look of horror on the humans' faces, which is really a credit to the actors. It's hard to act against something which looks kind of ridiculous. And so I also feel for green screen performers these days.
Yes.
Then you know this is supposed to be scary. We're scary because we're told it's scary, not because we're shown something inherently scary.
It could have been a lot worse than it is. But if they'd shot it the way Bradbury wrote it, you wouldn't really see the creature at all. I think that is untenable for a film. I think really in a film you do have to show something. So I think Bradbury was being a bit of a purist by trying not to show it. And he did say in interviews that he gave them two versions of his story. He gave them a version that he would have preferred, which didn't reveal the creature, and he gave them a version where the creature does appear. Now, I'm not sure that there is much evidence of that really happening. So I think what happened is that the producers said, nope, we're going to show the monster no matter what. But it is remarkably restrained compared to some movies of the era.
Oh yeah, they aren't like commonly walking around, but there are several shots. In fact, there's one of them where John and Ellen appear to like drive through an alien in their first encounter, and so then I'm wondering, well, are they projections or something else? I think it's just that they got very, very close to the alien.
We kind of get a sense of the aliens as being like an ethereal presence rather than a physical form. And I think when the aliens first spread out from the spaceship, there's a suggestion that they're almost like ghosts, really. I mean, I think they are heard through the telephone line by the telephone repairman before we ever see anything.
Yes.
So it's like they're energy creatures rather than physical creatures. But then later on, they turn into people. Quite what the life cycle is of these creatures, I've never really understood.
Yeah, long pieces of wire act as great natural antennas. And so I assumed that they were somehow passively picking up transmissions from the spaceship, because as Frank, the line repairman, hands off the headphones to John, you start to hear theremin music.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's your cue. Oh, I'm listening to this. I'm hearing something otherworldly that shouldn't be there. And this was one of the first places where I was wondering if this was a piece of the original Bradbury that made it through, because of what Frank says at that time. It's a great quote, and this is what it is. After you've been working out in the desert 15 years like I have, you hear a lot of things, see a lot of things too. Sun in the sky, the heat, all that sand out there with the rivers, the lakes that aren't real at all. And sometimes you think that the wind gets in the wires, cue theremin music, and hums and listens and talks, just like what we're hearing now.
Yeah. Pure Bradbury.
Yeah, and I'm like, that's the stuff right there.
Yeah, that is pretty much taken from his treatment. Now, just to be technical for a moment, a screen treatment should really be a present tense telling of a story that can then be turned into a full-fledged script. Mm-hmm. And usually a treatment doesn't have dialogue in it. It can have, and they sometimes do, but mostly treatments don't have dialogue. You're just describing the events of the movie. But Bradbury did put dialogue in, and that's why his treatment does look like a script, So the official scriptwriter, Harry Essex, was basically given a script, and then his job was just to kind of tidy it up a bit and turn it into a properly formatted script. But yeah, a lot of the dialogue does come from Bradbury's original treatment. And I've got here a paragraph of how Bradbury describes the sound, as well as the dialogue from the lineman. He puts this in his treatment. He says, "And what he hears, and what we hear, is like a prickle, a tremble, a blowing of wind across the threads of a harp. It is like rain falling distantly upon the strings of a harp. It is a shivering and sighing. It is like someone breathing on the line far away." Now that is unusual language for a screen treatment, but Bradbury being Bradbury, he's the poet of the pulps, He has to elaborate. And I don't think there's any doubt that that kind of language in his treatment inspired the filmmakers. Much of that language is carried over into Harry Essex's script. And Jack Arnold, the director of the film, said that he really enjoyed working with Bradbury's material because he found it so poetic and inspirational. So you would think that Bradbury would do a lot more screenwriting after this. And of course he did. I think this was the first thing he ever did in Hollywood. He was 32 years old when he worked on this project. He'd already published The Martian Chronicles. That was in 1950. And at the time that he started work on this script, he'd just turned in the manuscript for his book Golden Apples of the Sun. And after it came from outer space, he turned The Fireman, a short story, into Fahrenheit 451, which of course is his best known and best selling book. So I've always said this is peak Bradbury right here. He's working in Hollywood on this movie, and he's just about to hand in Fahrenheit 451. And then after he's finished Fahrenheit 451, he goes off to Dublin with John Huston to write the screenplay for Moby Dick. And that was considered a step up from this because, Huston was a major filmmaker, the director of The Maltese Falcon, one of the best Hollywood movies. So this is Bradbury at his creative peak, I think.
Interesting.
I must say there was an ongoing antagonism between Bradbury and Essex for many years because Bradbury, being somebody who did a lot of interviews and a lot of TV appearances and a lot of public speaking, he was always saying, I basically wrote the script for that film. Harry Essex didn't have to do a thing. And Essex was really peed off because, he'd written the script. He had the official credit as the screenwriter. And he was really annoyed that Bradbury was taking all the credit. And in a lot of cases, when screenwriters get annoyed like that, they're quite right, But in this instance, having compared the two, I've got Essex's script, I've got Bradbury's treatment. Most of what is in Essex's script is taken directly from Bradbury. It's not even paraphrased, it's just retyped. He did make some original contributions, though, Harry Essex. Do you remember there's a very brief scene where there's a knock at the door, and I think it's Ellen goes to the door and opens the door and screams her head off as if she's seen the most terrifying thing in the world. And all it is a little boy with a space helmet on. Do you remember that scene?
I remember that scene.
Do you think that was in Bradbury's original treatment?
It kind of has that boy in summer feel to it.
It's not, though. That is a Harry Essex invention. It's not in Bradbury's script anywhere. Nothing like it is in there. So, no, that's Harry Essex. Or, to be fair, what we don't know, because I've never been able to get hold of any documentation about this, we don't know how hands-on the director and producer were. According to Jack Arnold, the director, he was left alone during the making of the film. He was able to do what he wanted with it. So, according to him, there was no interference from producers. So it's possible that he was responsible for some of the changes to the script. But equally, in interviews, Jack Arnold says, I was very pleased to work with Bradbury's material because it was great and I didn't need to change anything. So it's difficult to be sure who came up with ideas, but certainly the screaming and the child in the space helmet is not Bradbury. Might be Jack Arnold. It's probably just Harry Essex, but we don't know. I don't think any of them are alive now, so we can't ask them.
Yeah. Barbara Rush passed away last year.
She was Ellen, I presume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting kind of little love triangle that goes on in the story between Ellen, who loves John, but John is always looking up at the sky and not always paying attention to what's happening right there on the ground. And the sheriff, who has known Ellen his whole life, they've gone to school together. The sheriff was originally a deputy under Ellen's father, and so he kind of has been watching out for her. And he warns John several times, saying, hey, she's following you instead of going to teach the kids in the school. And she mopes around after you like a lost puppy. And so there's a nice little arc through there about John and Ellen's relationship and what changes to it across the arc of the story.
Yeah. I think that is fine in the film. I don't think there's any issue with that. When you read Bradbury's treatment, you find yourself getting a bit confused by that relationship or those relationships because Bradbury doesn't have it quite that way. In his version, the sheriff is a lot older. I can't remember whether Bradbury specifies the age, but it's as if John Putnam is in his 30s and the sheriff is in his 50s. So in Bradbury's version, some of that kind of be careful what you're doing with Ellen, I've known her for years, is coming across as a parental concern, a kind of a father figure being concerned about her well-being. But of course, in the film itself, the casting is such that the sheriff and Putnam appear to be of the same generation. And in fact, I looked up the actors, and the guy playing the sheriff, I think it's Charles Drake, He's actually 5 years younger than the guy playing Putnam. I don't think that matters for the film. Anyone watching the film, I think the relationships do make sense. But when you read the Bradbury one, you think, oh, hang on, you're now casting these relationships in a different way, and you've confused me.
Yeah. In fact, it's Ellen's kidnapping and replacement that is the thing that really kind of gets the sheriff fired up.
Yes.
Yeah, so Ellen disappears. The sheriff and John run out to the mines where John has his encounter with the aliens. John goes back and they have this talk, and the sheriff wants to know where Ellen is. And, John says, well, they won't let us have her back until they're finished with what they need to do. And the sheriff is like, well, we're going to make sure they're finished. And so he goes back to town to raise the town.
Yeah.
Get out the torches and the pitchforks.
Or at least the guns.
Yeah.
I've got a note here about one improvement that Essex made. I mean, having spoken in very scathing terms of Harry Essex, but he did actually make some improvements to the script. And one of them is to do with who knows what in the story. In Bradbury's treatment, Putnam goes down, when the spaceship first lands, Putnam goes down to look at it, and Ellen goes with him, so that they're both together. But in Essex's script, Putnam does it on his own. So he's the only one who sees the spaceship. And I think that is much stronger, because it means that whatever Putnam says, there will be some people who don't believe him, because there's nobody to corroborate what he's reporting.
Yeah. And it builds on his the separateness that John has from everybody else. He's the rational man in a small town full of small-minded people. And that's a horrible brushstroke to make, but unfortunately it's very, very accurate in some ways.
I think it makes the story and what's at stake a lot clearer than it would otherwise be. I mean, you could argue, I suppose, if you followed Bradbury's original plan, you might have ended up with a more sophisticated set of relationships between characters. Mm-hmm. But I think, actually, you need clarity. When you've got weirdness going on in a story, I think you need as much clarity as you can have.
Yeah, as I've been thinking about this note is really close in tone and some strokes to the Midwich Cuckoos.
Yes.
Now, the whole idea there, and I think we've talked about this, is in another episode, every woman in town gets pregnant, and then they start protecting the children. And then the protection of the children becomes something that isn't fully willing. But the town rallies around the women and protects them. And that's kind of what John does. Even the fact that they've kidnapped Ellen, he's protecting these aliens because he believes them to be, innocent and the victims of what's going on, and knows that the people in the town may not understand what's going on in reality.
Yes, I'm just looking up Midwich Cuckoos because I can't for the life of me remember which year that came out. 57. 57.
Yeah. In fact, I almost want to see a complete spin on this. So the people in the town, like I said, are painted with a pretty bad brushstroke about being small-minded. You could completely flip that around and say that the people in the town find the aliens and are working to help them repair their ship and to protect them from the big town people that are coming. That's the television crews and the government and the industrialists, all who would want to exploit the aliens and their technology for personal gain, media rights, and whatever. Whereas the small town people just would be helping their neighbors accidentally who break down and need a way out of town. And that would harken right back to this story, although the people trying to help them are really John.
That's really good. I think there's a lot of depth to this, whichever way you cut it, whether you cut it along the lines of political paranoia, which this is reflecting, or whether you're looking at it in terms of relationships of characters. I think it works on so many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the genius of Bradbury.
Whilst also being full of tropes that we've become so familiar with over the years.
Yeah. Everybody smokes. They're limited by the fact that they have to get to a telephone versus having cell phones. It's a very different thing. Very different time.
Yeah. Just looking through my notes to see if I've got anything else about positive changes that Harry Essex made. And I've got a note here that in Essex's script, something that isn't in the Bradbury treatment, in Essex's script, the sheriff always seems to be trying to normalise everything. So, for example, the women, I think this is the women in the sheriff's office, think it's odd that the telephone linemen have changed their clothes. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
Remind me how that goes in the film.
So Frank's wife and George's girlfriend are talking with the sheriff, and they bring in John and Ellen to kind of talk and find out what's going on because they're involved. And they specifically mention that they took their clothing with them. And that's really worrisome because you don't take your clothing with you unless you intend to be gone for a long time. And neither man had arranged any vacation or time off from the people they love or their work.
Yes. And what Essex puts into the script is that the sheriff sees that as, well, not normal, but it's entirely possible. So he says something like, well, it's logical that they might have been going on an overnight job. So, they're going to take a change of clothes with them. So the women have observed this weird thing. And rather than say, yes, that is weird, let me investigate, he's just trying to normalise and naturalise everything. And the result, therefore, is that you've got some characters more paranoid than others. And the sheriff is less paranoid at some points, but ultimately he ends up leading the people with the metaphorical pitchforks at the end of the movie, but which I suppose he has to.
He's the town sheriff. He's used to trying to keep things calm and in control within boundaries.
Yeah. Have you seen him in other films, by the way, or any of these actors?
Well, Russell Johnson, one of the two linemen, George, I'm familiar with a lot of his work because he's also the professor from Gilligan's Island.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And he's got a part in another, I don't think it's a Jack Arnold movie. No, but he has a part in This Island Earth.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, that's the one with the aliens with the big foreheads, isn't it?
Yes.
And Richard Carlson, who's John Putnam, he, I think, is in The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is another Jack Arnold film, and several other science fiction films of the 50s, which I can't remember right now. But I know he was in lots of things. And I think Barbara Rush was in some other science fiction movies as well, but I can't remember.
I didn't catch her filmography, but she did get the 1954 Golden Globe for Best Promising Female Newcomer.
Wow, for this?
Yes.
I shouldn't have sounded so surprised when I said that. For this?
Well, most science fiction doesn't get, back then especially, did not get recognized in award season.
Yeah, that's true. There is another actor in this film, female actor, who gets a special credit at the end with a big close-up of her face and a character name. I've forgotten what the character is, and I've forgotten what her name is. Mm-hmm. And for years, I would watch this film whenever it came on TV and see her at the end and think, who's she? I don't remember her. Did you notice that?
I don't know that I caught all the credits, so no.
She's got a very minor role. I think it might be somebody in a diner. She just pours coffee for somebody, maybe has one line of dialogue, and yet she's in the end credits with a picture, as if she's one of the main stars of the movie. And for years that just puzzled me. Why on earth is she there? And it turns out she was involved in some of the 3D camera tests that they did before making the movie, because this was made in 3D. So they just got a model or an actor to come in just to do these tests. So they got some high quality footage of her just posing. And so it gets put in at the end, even though she's hardly even in the movie.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'll do, I will find out her name and the character name, and I will put a thumbnail image of it in the show notes for this so that everyone knows what the hell I'm talking about.
Now, the 3D at the time would have been the classic blue-red 3D, right?
Yes, because this was made in black and white. So yes, you could use the red and the blue. Once you get to colour 3D films, you have to start using polarizing lenses. But this was black and white, so yeah, just the two colours would do. Did you get any sense watching it which bits would have been sort of designed for 3D?
Oh yeah. I think anytime you're talking about the aliens, whether it's seeing them or seeing things from their point of view, I think that would have been a 3D fest right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some things that are less obvious. At the beginning of the film, when we first meet Putnam and Ellen, we see them through a fireplace.
Yeah.
And that works quite well in 3D because obviously you get the flames in front of you and the actors are behind the flames. But that looks okay in 2D as well. And there's some other things like that. There's a scene where the sheriff's gun is sort of hanging, it's in a holster, and the holster is sort of hanging on a hook, and it's somewhat in the foreground. And in a 2D screening, you're aware that it's there, but it doesn't dominate. But in 3D, it kind of dominates the scene. You're well aware that that gun is hanging there. And I think he does take the gun down at the end of the scene. So it's only a slight difference in emphasis, but some things in 3D are blindingly obvious and some things in 2D are not, So I think the gun was one of those. But the thing that I didn't expect when I saw it in 3D was some of those outdoor scenes. So we have the spaceship is down in a crater because it's crashed like a meteorite. And so next to the crater is a kind of a raised area of Earth, or almost like a hill or a mountain or something. And we frequently see over the top of this hill, we see the press and the TV cars and the police all driving up to the hilltop. And we see people walking to the edge of the crater and looking down. And all of that looks really spectacular in 3D. And for years, I saw this in 2D and never really thought of those as being special 3D scenes. But when you see those in 3D, everything looks enormous because what Arnold and his cinematographer have done is they've staged things in depth. They've very carefully placed things in the foreground and in the background, and they have things traveling from background to foreground and vice versa. So they're making good use of depth. But I've always said that any good film director working in 2D will also make good use of depth, because film isn't just about people moving left to right on the screen. It is about distances and being able to isolate characters, to bring characters into the scene and so on. So it is actually quite a good 3D film. It doesn't throw things at you constantly like some 3D films do, but it does make good, intelligent use of 3D.
So one of the things I do is I do research and I make spreadsheets and lists, and I've been keeping track of all of the movies for the OMSI Science Fiction Film Festivals. And I went back and I got all of them using the Internet Archive and some other resources. And I've thought about, trying to figure out which distributors they can pull from and which ones they can't. That's, something we talked about with Russ last year.
Yeah.
And maybe I will drop a note in the OMSI tip line and say, hey, I would love to see this movie again in 3D.
Yeah.
To see if it's even available or not. It may not be. Plus, they'd have to go through all the hassle of getting the glasses to everybody. But what a treat to do,
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes. I did a film screening series at Indiana University a few years ago. And I was involved in selecting the films and deciding on what was going into each evening's program. And it ran for about a week. And one night we had It Came From Outer Space in 3D. And we showed the film in 3D, and it was from celluloid. Some of the films we showed were from hard drives because they were distributed digitally. But for the 3D version of this film at that time, the only version that was available was a celluloid print. So that's what we screened. And yeah, we had to get glasses for everyone. And we had to do a test in the afternoon before the public were let in to see which way round to wear the glasses. Because there is a convention. I can't remember what the convention is, but it's like the red one always goes on the left or something. There is a fixed way of wearing these. And we went into it assuming that that's the orientation this print would have. But when we ran the print, we found that we had to actually reverse the glasses because it was printed differently to whatever the sort of standard was. But yeah, it really gave a sense of occasion to have everyone putting on these 3D glasses. And to be able to take a photo of the audience all wearing them was really good. But that was the only time I've ever seen it in 3D. I believe there is a DVD release in 3D. I have a 4K version, which is a 2-disc set. And it's possible I may have a 3D version on there, but I don't have a 3D TV, so I've got no way of viewing it. So Let me give you some sort of unusual things that are in Bradbury's treatment that didn't really make it into the film. Oh, there's a scene that Bradbury wrote that just isn't in the film at all. And it's a scene where Putnam and Ellen go walking through the town and they see their reflections repeatedly in shop windows. And they see mannequins as well. And it gives them the creeps because they've already seen lookalikes who've replaced real people. So to see their own reflection gives them a fright because they think, they've got me as well. Oh no, it's okay. It's only a reflection. And they see mannequins, which again, they think, oh God, aliens. But no, they're not. So that's a nice scene in terms of its relation to the main themes of the film. But also, they're talking about getting married. And that isn't in the film. No great loss, I suppose. But at the beginning of the film, you've got this, as you described them, boyfriend and girlfriend, Putnam and Ellen. There is some hint that she has been staying the night, but it's not entirely clear what the level of their relationship is. I mean, this is the 1950s. You can't really show anything in any detail. But it was clearly Bradbury's intention that these were two people who were just about to get married or contemplating marriage. But that goes from the film because, I don't think there was any room for it. So they didn't even bother with that.
Yeah. In the beginning, there's a talk about astrology and star signs, and Ellen talks about the difference between them. And I think she's kind of hinting that she was wanting a more permanent relationship, but that John is too busy thinking and doing about other things. And that's the arc that I mentioned.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Across here, John becomes very concerned with Ellen. And then at the very end, I think there's a little wrap-up piece which kind of says, yeah, this is a set thing. He wants to be with her. She has always wanted to be with him.
Yeah, so I suppose Bradbury's scene sort of in the middle of the movie might have weakened the overall arc if they are explicitly talking about marriage. So I can see why the scene was taken out, but it is an interesting little scene in its own right. In Bradbury's treatment, Putnam doesn't seem to quite know how the aliens are replacing people. But he says that it might be an optical illusion, it might be hypnosis. So I don't think Bradbury himself was ever entirely clear how these aliens work. And that is perhaps one of the weaknesses of his treatment. Having said that, I don't know if the film knows quite how these aliens work. And I, as a viewer, have never really understood how these aliens work. I mean, I can believe it's an illusion. I can believe it's hypnosis. I can believe it's physical takeover. I can believe any of those things, but I don't think the film tells us. So I see that as a bit of a weakness.
There's just a line that says, we would not take your minds or souls or bodies. And then there's another line that's like, we can appear as you for a time.
Right, yes. And there's a little sequence, very short part of a scene, where Putnam refers to a spider and he points down to the ground and we see an obviously plastic spider that just sort of jumps and moves a little bit. Terrible special effect. They should have done it better than that. I mean, how difficult is it to do spiders? Well, Jack Arnold would soon find out because he later made a film called Tarantula, which has these giant spiders. But that little moment with the spider, in Bradbury's treatment, that's a much longer scene and a much longer piece of dialogue. And it's really all getting to Bradbury's idea that alien things scare us for no good reason. Mm-hmm. They scare us simply because they are alien. So there's a whole scene built around that as a kind of a monologue. I mean, it is dialogue. It's Putnam talking to Ellen or maybe to the sheriff. I can't remember. So it's the thematic heart of Bradbury's treatment. And it's just taken out and replaced with this one shot of a spider. So that is an instance of the film being much weaker than the original treatment. But in many respects, I think the film actually improves upon Bradbury's script or Bradbury's treatment.
It's a well-regarded movie. It was nominated for AFI's list of the top 10 science fiction movies.
Oh, that's good. It's good to know. I think partly that's because it was the first of its kind. Jack Arnold went on to do a whole string of films quite similar to this, with these sort of desert locations and mostly recognizable but alien creatures, so tarantulas. Okay, the creature from the Black Lagoon isn't really terribly recognizable. He's some sort of fish man.
Yeah.
But Arnold did a whole string of these movies. It really defined his career. I mean, he carried on working in film and TV for decades. Ended up, I think, just directing TV. I think he might even have directed some Gilligan's Islands with Russell Johnson, who you mentioned earlier. But this really was the beginning of the 1950s science fiction boom in movies, which by the end of the decade has kind of deteriorated into just horror movies. If you look at American science fiction in particular, at the beginning of the 50s, there's all sorts of quirky films doing individual and different things. Then this strong theme of paranoia develops through the 50s, and aliens become more and more monstrous. And by the end of the 50s, they're just shock horror movies, and there's not much else going on in American science fiction. In the movies. I mean, literature, yes, it's kind of, for me, it's peak American science fiction time in the late 50s. You've got some really great writers doing some of their best work at that time. But in the movies, no, not so much. So this was one of the first of its kind. So I think that's part of the reason it's well regarded. But it's also one of the reasons, as you say, that people find it quite corny because it's got all the tropes in there.
Yeah, when you invent the tropes, that's kind of what's to be expected. My son was talking about that, and I like I mentioned before, I had to remind him these people invented the tropes that you don't like to see in movies nowadays. And so when you see those, they're a product of their time, and you have to look and say, "Oh yeah, that's just what they did then," and that's okay.
Yeah. Give them a break. I've got a little quote here from Bradbury himself in 2002 when he was reflecting on this film. So this is like 50 years after the film was made. He described it as a nice film, but not as good as it could have been. I think he's still clinging at that point in his life as an 82-year-old. He's still clinging to this idea that his treatment is better than the film. Having studied both and having studied Harry Essex's film, I can see that there are some distinct improvements in the film that was made, and very, very little that is lost from Bradbury's. The only really significant thing is that extended scene around the spider. Everything else that Bradbury put in there gets into the film. So I think it was better than he allowed it to be. He just called it a nice film. I think it's bordering on greatness.
Yeah, I wondered whether or not it would benefit from the Jaws treatment.
What would that be?
Well, we mentioned how the aliens are shown early and somewhat often, but there's a completely different level of horror if you never show them.
Right, yeah.
There's a scene in the movie where Jack and Ellen are off the side of the road in the dark, and John turns his flashlight on one of those great big desert trees, and Ellen screams. That's part of her job.
Yes.
Her job is to scream and to tell us to be scared. And that's almost more effective than some of the special effects shots with the actual aliens. And so if we hid the aliens more until the second beat of the movie or the third beat, maybe that's a more effective way to get people tense and scared and aware of the otherness and difference. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. And incidentally, Jaws, of course, was made by Steven Spielberg, and he credits this film, It Came From Outer Space, as the inspiration for Close Encounters. And he told Bradbury that. He said to Bradbury, "How did you like your movie?" And Ray said, "What are you talking about?" And this was based on It Came From Outer Space. It's not the same film, it's not the same story, but it does have some similarity. In particular, the sympathetic treatment of the aliens, because they're not monstrous in Close Encounters. We barely see them until the very end. They're not monstrous, but they are scary to some people. So you can see the sort of the through line from the one film through to the other. I have a wee quiz here for you. I have a Bradbury or not Bradbury quiz.
Okay.
Perhaps echoing that earlier episode where we had, what was it, Rays, Brads and Berries, courtesy of our friend Seth.
Oh, Seth's devious quiz.
Yes.
Yes.
This isn't too devious, but it requires you to sort of decipher the clues a little bit. So I'm going to give you a series of clues to films which may or may not be adapted from Ray Bradbury works. And you simply have to tell me, yes, Ray, or no, not Ray, for each one. And then I'll give you 1 point for each one that you correctly identify as yes, Ray, or no, not Ray. And I'll also give you bonus points if you can identify the film that I'm referring to.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let me give you the first one. This film stars Julie Christie and Oscar Werner. It was made in England by a French director who spoke no English, and many books were harmed in the making of this film.
That is Yes, Ray, Fahrenheit 451.
Correct. So you get 2 points there, one for being correct and one for identifying the film. So 2 points so far. Very good. The title character of this film was played by Grant Williams. In a remake, his place was taken by Lily Tomlin. They both did well for such a small role.
I believe this is No Ray. And is it the Incredible Shrinking Man versus Woman series?
Correct. Yes. Grant Williams was the Incredible Shrinking Man. Lily Tomlin was the Incredible Shrinking Woman. I mean, strictly speaking, I think her film was a parody of the original, but it also passes for a remake. So you've got everything right so far. The Incredible Shrinking Man, by the way, just for the record, is from a Richard Matheson book, not a Ray Bradbury. The next one. This film had a title character played by Rod Steiger. He also played assorted lead characters in the short films that make up the overall film. You could say Steiger's role was well drawn.
Yes, Ray, The Illustrated Man.
Correct. You're doing well. Let's see, what else have we got here? In this film, there was a blonde one and a dark-haired one. There was also a dust witch and a Mr. Dark. Your thumbs may be pricking as they approach you.
Yes, Ray. And as we've talked about, this has an incredible adaptational history from screenplay to book, back into screenplay to second screenplay. And this is Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Correct, yeah. Next one. It's the wrong time of year for this TV movie. The star name attached to it is Leonard Nimoy, and he's very animated, or as animated as you will find in a Hanna-Barbera production. And watch out for that tree.
Yes, Ray. The Halloween Tree.
Correct. And finally, actors in monkey costumes, spacemen in spacesuits, and something highly polished has turned up on the moon, deliberately buried, they say.
No, Ray, and that is 2001.
Correct. And for the record, that's from a work by...
Arthur Clarke.
Yes.
I was a little confused because I was remembering that it comes from the short story, The Sentinel, but when people think about the novel, that was actually co-written at the same time as the book.
That's right, yes. So, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions, 12 points available, and you got all 12. So, very well done.
I'll have to save those extra points for next time.
Carry them forward to the next round. I've got some past, present, and future items here. With a Bradbury theme, I've got that this year is the 75th anniversary of the publication of The Martian Chronicles. And I was informed a few days ago, and I've checked this, it seems to be true, the actual anniversary date of the Martian Chronicles publication is Star Wars Day. It was published on May the 4th, 1950.
Wow.
So we always call May the 4th Star Wars Day. Ray was there first. Now, do you have any past, present, and future items?
I did want to mention that this is the last week of the OMSI Science Fiction Film Festival. They're going to end with a bang. Some great movies coming up. Gattaca, Arrival, another one that I'm seeing that I've just completely blanked on. So there's still time for you to go out there and see some good science fiction.
Okay, but by the time this episode goes out, there may not be.
Yeah, so maybe I should change that to say, boy, I have really enjoyed the OMSI Science Fiction Film Festival this year, and I'm looking forward to next year's as well.
Wow. Did you see Gattaca and, what was the other one you're going to see? Arrival. Did you see those?
I saw both of them.
A past item. This is a strange one. Back in March, Mental Floss, the website, published an article on which US states would best survive an alien invasion. Did you see this?
I think I saw a headline, but didn't actually read the article.
Right, yeah. I mean, these people who did this research gathered various statistics about various US states, their population density, various other things. I didn't really understand the calculation, and it wasn't really very clear. Anyway, they came up with a list of 50 states in order as to which ones would survive best if aliens invaded. And the state with the worst chance of survival, at number 50, is Nevada, possibly because so much of it is desert. So the various metrics they used kind of let Nevada down a bit. So Nevada's at number 50. I'm afraid Oregon is at number 46.
Oh.
So you're not going to do very well when the invasion comes. Do you want the top 5?
Yeah, please. I guess I need to know where to go.
Yeah, you can work out a route of how to get there by following these 5. First of all, you want to head to Minnesota, because that's at number 5. But then to improve your chances, head to New York, because that's at number 4. Then head up to Massachusetts, because that's at number 3. But then, unfortunately, you've got to head south. You've got to get to Alabama, because that's at number 2. And then north again, because at number 1 is Virginia. So who knew?
Virginia?
Yeah, I think it's something to do with the Blue Ridge Mountains.
I might have to read that article and maybe quibble with them. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, they did a spreadsheet, so you could do your own spreadsheet and and work it out. And I've got a future item. This is also Bradbury related. Every now and again, I do a quick search on IMDb just to see if there's any new stuff based on Bradbury material coming out. And I came across something which I had seen before, but I'd forgotten about. That apparently there is a film version of a Bradbury short story called Asleep in Armageddon, which is meant to be coming out this year. However, if you look online, you will also see announcements from 2021 where they said, we've just finished this film and it's coming out later this year. And they've been saying that every year up until now. So I get the impression this is a low-budget affair, possibly a student film. But anyway, it can join the pantheon of Bradbury stories that have been made into a movie. And this particular one, Asleep in Armageddon, is not a classic Bradbury story, but it is out of copyright. So it's a good choice if you're a filmmaker trying to make a film with no money. This is a very good choice because it won't cost you anything.
Well, at least not for the rights.
Yeah, for the rights, yeah. So when I get more information, I'll share it. But at the moment, I've not been able to find out very much, except that the writer-director is named Jason DeStefano. So good luck to him. I hope he's listening. If he is, he can contact me and tell me all about the movie.
Hey, yeah, we could review it.
We could. We'd love to do that. So, are we done?
I think we're done, yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining me on this weird episode. For the benefit of Bradbury 100 listeners, you've been listening to Bradbury 100 with special guest Colin Kuskie. But actually, this is Science Fiction 101. And we do this all the time, but not always about Bradbury. And for our regular listeners, you know that anyway. So, yeah. Thanks for doubling up, Colin. You only get paid once for this podcast.
I'm talking to my agent. That's not acceptable. Thanks for listening.
We're Phil Nichols and Colin Kuskie.
Our music is from Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com.
Please visit our website at 101sf.blogspot.com,
where you can support us by buying us a coffee.
and you can find us on Facebook and Blue Sky. So see you next time. I hope you enjoyed Colin Kuskie and yours truly reviewing It Came From Outer Space for our podcast Science Fiction 101. Take a look at the show notes at bradburymedia.co.uk and you'll see links for Science Fiction 101 in case you want to subscribe. And I'll also throw in some links to other Bradbury podcasts that Colin and I have done together over the years. Next time on Bradbury 100, normal service will resume. I'll see you there. Bye for now. Bradbury 100 is presented and produced by Phil Nichols, and theme music is by Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com. You can find the show notes and much more on Bradbury at bradburymedia.co.uk. And please check out my other podcast, Science Fiction 101, where we discuss the past, present and future of science fiction. You'll find it wherever good pods are given away.